California runs into problems like snow in Los Angeles and flooding in the LA River. And when these sort of calamities affect California, it's very it's scary for the folks in California, but also means that we may not get food here in Hawaii. And so there's all these add-on effects of these things in our interdependent global economy. So I'll just share with you, because I'm so late this evening. I'll just share with you what I'm working on, which is I guess it's 3 or 4 things together. But I'll start with the thing that is the most like Star Trek of the things that I'm thinking about, which is actually trying to reverse climate change by using large machines which pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. Because it's technology that has been in development for years. On the space station, I think, they have carbon scrubbers that scrub the air so that the astronauts can continue to live up in the habitation modules on the space station. There are now companies on this planet that there's one in Switzerland, there's a couple in California, there's one in Canada that are making machines that mechanically separate CO2 from the rest of the atmosphere. And some of them, they all kind of look different, but for the most part, they look like large air conditioning machines. And they pull in carbon dioxide, and either using an aqueous solution or a physical membrane, they separate the CO2 off of the rest of the air particles. And I think it's really important for us to do this, because like what you were saying a minute ago, that there's so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now that even if we were to today stop emitting, right, and by some miracle we were able to convert 100% of our economy over to electric vehicles and electric aircraft, and instead of making steel through burning coal, we would actually use hydrogen or whatever. I mean, that conversion is amazing and would be spectacular, but there would still be way too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it would continue to sit there for 30 or 40 years, I think. And so we have to actually dig it out of the atmosphere. And so that's the thing that I'm kind of most captivated by. And so we're looking at places in Honolulu, not in Honolulu proper, but I'm sorry, in Hawaii, where we could build a direct air capture. It's called direct air capture technology. A place where we can build that kind of facility. And I see it as like a century-long project that we have to start this decade, but then we have to keep these machines working for decades to come, because that's the only way to pull out enough CO2 for us to actually reverse the mistakes that we've made, frankly, over the last several centuries. And so who here has studied chemistry? Okay, what are the things that we can do with carbon dioxide or carbon? What do we do with it now? Maybe that's the way to start. Like what? What's that? Right. I mean, we use. I mean, we're made out of carbon, right? But also, like, it's all of our it's like plastics. It's fuel, aviation fuel. It's gasoline, right? That's all things that are made from carbon. And there are now, there's now the technology to start to take the CO2 that we can capture from the atmosphere and then reuse it in all these different ways. And so the specific thing that I'm interested in doing is because we're here in Hawaii, where in order to get here, I'm guessing you took an airplane, right? We are completely dependent on aviation, more so than most places, you know. And you know, what's interesting is that globally, aviation accounts for at the most like 5% of emissions, of carbon emissions. But for Hawaii, it's a third of our carbon emissions. It's a full third. And there's some people who believe that we should actually double that number, because the third, when people say it's a third of emissions, they're talking about the flights that originate in Hawaii. But, you know, that doesn't account at all for the people who are enticed to come here because of the marketing that we project into the rest of the world. You know, we tell people, here, come to visit this place. So, you know, maybe we should actually double that carbon impact to 50 or 60%. Anyways, it's a very large source of emissions. And so what we're looking at doing is building a facility that in the short term makes jet fuel, so that we can make essentially carbon neutral aviation fuel using the CO2. But then long term, you know, at some point, maybe in 20, 30 years from now, the aircraft will no longer be in use, and there will be new planes that are hydrogen powered or using some new battery chemistry, which would be higher density than the current lithium ion batteries, et cetera. And so they won't need the carbon neutral jet fuel anymore. And then what I'm hoping we could do at that point is to take the CO2 itself and actually bury it in our rock, in our volcanic rock, which is what the islands are made out of. And there's a really wonderful chemistry that happens. Actually, it happens naturally in the course of time in nature, but you can inject CO2 into basalt, which is what the islands are made out of, and the CO2 in a slurry of water, it crystallizes within the holes in the basalt rock structures, and it just fills in all these gaps. And it's a way for us to permanently, like on a geologic time scale, sequester and hold and store carbon dioxide. So we could actually, you know, long term, we could actually help with reversing this problem. So that's one thing that I'm working on. Let's see, I'm trying to think. So California, Pennsylvania. Who's from Pennsylvania? And Canada, is that right? And Germany. Okay. In any of in the places that you guys are from, except for you, have you, you know, when people propose energy projects or you know, kind of new infrastructure projects or things like the Star Trek idea that I have, what is the community response when those kinds of things are raised or proposed?
What kind of energy product?
Like a solar farm or?
It's just non-existent where I'm from.
Where are you from?
New Mexico.
New Mexico?
I feel like, at least where I'm, like the specific area, it's oil and gas industry. So that's not really an option for them because they see oil and gas as their livelihood. So any proposal of something like that would be seen as very radical.
Sure.
So, and not sustainable. Like they wouldn't see that they could power anything.
There's no sun in New Mexico at all.
None. How about anybody else?
This is something that fascinating, but kind of relative to the topic, but it's also from here. So the latest thing I remember hearing that was very outraged was the last power plant, I believe, it was like a carbon-based power plant that provided a lot of electricity for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because the state of Hawaii had a major goal to reach full self-sustaining electricity. People were getting mad at one because people didn't focus on the fact that it was self-sustaining. People focused on the amount of jobs that were dropped, the people that used to work at that plant. And on top of that, I think the biggest thing they complained I think it affects all of us though. The monthly rate for electricity went up like almost 15% or something like that. So that's about the closest relative.
No, those are really good points. I'm curious what other experiences you guys have had.
So kind of the same. We have like kind of migrated, so a lot of people work there.
Yeah.
But I think most of all it's not everything because people don't think climate change exists. And it's like a lot of people think it's like a political scam. Something like that.
Where in Pennsylvania are you from?
It's like, you know where Erie is?
Oh, yeah, I do actually. I have an
Yeah,
uncle who lives in
like
here.
an hour and a half.
It's like kind of central.
It's like right by the water.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else?
I'm from British Columbia, so most of like our electricity stuff is all hydro.
Hydro, yeah.
So when it comes to sustainability, like the community usually like gives a thumbs up. So like a few years ago, or like in my city, the city council allotted like a section of the budget to add new like charging for the electric vehicles like all over the city.
Mm-hmm.
And it made everybody happy because like most of the councils have electric vehicles anyway, and a lot of the people that live in the city have.
Yes, we all want to go live in your city. That sounds like a neat place. Yeah. Well, what I'm hearing is actually the thread of economics. That you have to have a real sense of the impact that the climate conversation has on jobs, on working people, right? And if we can't figure out a way to make those two things work together, then we're gonna get stuck. I mean, we have been stuck for decades because, like, because it's been seen as like green is anti our livelihood. It's anti the needs of our families. Yeah, does that resonate?
What about Germany?
Yeah, what about Germany?
Like Europe?
I think Germany's project like this is good. It's a good idea, but I think the community thinks that it costs too much. Too much money.
Okay. Yeah, people don't like it when it's too expensive. It's a human trait. Yeah. Has anyone here studied the Mondragon cooperatives in the Basque region of Spain? Have you had them? You haven't had them? No. I bring it up because it's something that I've been fascinated with, and you know, I'm here in Hawaii. Spain is really far away. It's closer for you guys, a little bit, but I've been fascinated with it because it's an example of a worker cooperative. And it's specifically a federation of worker cooperatives. So are you familiar with what I'm talking about, with the Mondragon cooperatives? It started off with a small group of students and a priest who was like their teacher, and it was in a polytechnic university. They were making paraffin stoves, and but it was a worker-owned enterprise, and they grew from that to now having, I don't know, more than 100,000 workers in a variety of enterprises, from making like renewable energy devices, appliances. They have schools, they have healthcare, all of which are provided as in a worker cooperative model. It's really fascinating, and it's not the only one like this. I mean, there are groups of worker-run, worker-owned enterprises all around the world. That's what I'm learning, and I think it's really cool because I think that should be how we approach this green transition. Is we should put workers at the very front of the conversation around the new world that we need to build, and like we have to actually build a new world. Like it's everything from making the electric vehicles to making the director capture machines, which I need to for the plant that I want to build. And so something that I'm really interested in right now, I'll just share is building a little cooperative of workers to go and manufacture these machines, because we're going to need a lot of them. Like, and it's a whole new industry. It's absolutely a growth industry. You know? So there's the piece around kind of worker ownership, and the other piece of it that I'm really interested in is community ownership, because at least the phenomenon that I've experienced, and maybe you saw this as well, is that a lot of the energy projects, a lot of these big things, they tend not to be owned by our folks. They're not locally owned at all. You know, it's huge companies, either national or transnational companies, that have identified that green energy is actually very profitable, contrary to what some of the oil and gas folks say. It makes a lot of energy and it makes a lot of money, and they've developed business models around building solar farms or wind farms all around the world and collecting the revenue from those solar farms or wind farms. And I'm part of a team that's building the first and now the second community-owned energy projects in Hawaii, and it's something that I'm incredibly proud of, because we're trying to, it's kind of like changing the fundamental economics, the fundamental model. So we're starting on the island of Molokai, which, who has anyone here been to Molokai? Or as they, you know, folks in Molokai will say Molokai, they don't say Molokai. It's a really unique community. It's a community that prides itself on sustainability and self-sufficiency. You know, in terms of population size, it's like the size of like Kalihi. I think it's probably roughly equivalent, same amount of people. But it's a beautiful, beautiful place with the highest electricity prices in the United States. Because up until very recently, all of the electricity is provided through oil, which is imported, and you know it's imported to Oahu, and then from Oahu it's then sent an additional barge, I imagine, to Molokai, and so the costs are just as astronomical. So building their own solar farm is a way of actually saving money and also providing some employment and local power. Like it's like, so my boss and partner, she led the community and with a small team of facilitators through a process where they got to imagine what their own solar farm would look like, what kinds of panels they would have, where they would be located, what kinds of inverters they would use, where on the island it would interconnect with the grid, and then how would they pay for it? How would it be financed? Who should benefit? What particular segment of the Molokai community will get first dibs at this electricity? You know, so it's a kind of amazing community-driven process, which I was only peripherally involved with. It happened before my time, but I got to tune into some of the Zoom meetings. It's just really neat, you know. Hearing regular folks talk about their future. Anyway, so we just got approval from the utility to move forward with constructing that project, and it's very exciting. And today is Monday, so we can't talk about it yet. But there's one other community-owned project on this island that is coming, and I'm hoping that it's a model that we can just keep scaling and identify other local communities throughout Hawaii where we can do it. But then long term, my goal is for us to build sort of a federation, like the kind of the Mondragon cooperatives in the Basque region of Spain, where across Hawaii, we can actually help each other to do more of this kind of community ownership, community design, so that we're not in a position where we're constantly fighting against developers coming in from the outside. What year is it when the Kahuku protests took place? 2021? Earlier? 2017. Okay. You guys aware of the protests on Oahu against the wind farm in Kahuku, or one of the wind farms in Kahuku? You were here. Just kidding. Anyway, so we've actually had there's been several instances where communities have really fought against these projects, because like what happened in Kahuku is there's these turbines that were coming up, and the community just wanted them moved a little bit so that they were less close to their school, to their homes, and the developers refused to do that. The community was very nice. We're very nice people, right? We're nice, but they wouldn't listen, and so the community, a bunch of folks got arrested, fighting the turbines coming up, and it's to the point where you really can't build a new wind project in Hawaii, because the experience has been like the community will say no, we'll fight the project. And you know, it's the same thing with geothermal. Geothermal is very politically difficult here. But I think the conversation changes when the community is literally in the driver's seat, figuring out where we're going to go. So it's not the developer telling us, "Oh, we're going to put a turbine here," but it's us saying, "You know, we would like a turbine here." It's a very different kind of dynamic. Anyway, so that's what I'm thinking about nowadays. Working on.
Has everybody seen The White Lotus? Season 1? You know, remember when they're on the beach and you can see the next island and they have all those windmills? It's pretty striking. That's Lanai, which Ellison, right?
Larry Ellison.
Bought. He bought 98% of it and then turned it into a wind farm. It used to be pineapple on almost the entire island. So there wasn't too much community involvement in that, because Lanai is it's kind of like Niihau. It's kind of like a privately owned island. So that
Yeah, but one guy owns 98% of it. That's
private property, yeah.
It's pretty nuts.
Can I get a little bit of background on the solar? I'm not the solar PV farm, so as far as industry and foreign industry coming in and putting those there rather than the community asking for them, is that due to state mandates for like energy, or is that just investment opportunity from abroad?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
And it's also the way in which planning and design happens here. A lot of times the community is the very last to hear about a plan. The plan happens in, the developer sees, oh, there's tax credits and there's revenue to build a wind farm or a solar farm, and they go and they talk to elected officials, they talk to the planning departments, and only very, very late in the process does the community get wind of it at all. And as a result, the community tends to be on the back foot, tends to be reacting to these developments instead of proactively designing them and creating them for ourselves.
So do you think a model at the local grassroots level is better than something that would come from like top down? So like, we've seen like so many different things, like talk about the Rio de Janeiro conference, or is that what it's called? Earth Summit, and then also with the Paris Agreement, right? Like all these things are coming from an international level, and we haven't seen significant change, even with like the Paris Agreement. It's just promises. There's there's no like way to enforce it or anything, but in some places, is that a model, like if so say the UN can actually enforce that and make countries be accountable for their carbon emission and put those, you know, new energy infrastructure there, right? Would some places benefit of that more than, you know, like a community ground like movement?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't really understand how the UN processes work with regards to climate change. It's way above my pay grade and level of understanding.
Well, I'm just wondering as far as like from top to down, right? I see that here in Hawaii, right? That community approach works better, right?
Yeah.
You know, but do you think that model can work everywhere?
I don't know. I just know that it works here. Yeah. And that's because of the particularities of our context, right? We have a private property regime. We have, you know, which is not a universal, right? I'm sure that in China, for instance, it's pretty easy for the government to say we're going to build the rail line that we want and the wind farms that we want, and they just get it done because they have a centralized authority. We don't have that, right? We have the thing that runs the table here tends to be capital, you know, big money, financial interests, and I think the only countervailing forces, and I guess it's also the particular environment in which I like to work in is with the community. It's a better leverage point.
Sometimes there's barriers here that have nothing to do with, you don't have to go that level. Like, I'll never forget that there was a headline in the paper one day, it's probably 10 years ago, where Hawaiian Electric said, we're planning to increase solar by triple. We're going to triple solar. So as a headline, that looks pretty good, right? But you had to be really in the know to realize that the rate of growth of solar was scheduled to go up by 7 times. So what were they actually doing? They're actually slowing the rate of growth of solar because they don't like solar really that much. They want to be in control of it, right? Because if you put solar on your own roof, then you can sell them electricity. They want to sell you electricity. So they wanted to contain the growth of solar. So that, you don't have to go all the way up to the UN. That's just like a local problem. But in the big picture, Hawaii is reasonably good on renewables, better than a lot of places.
I mean, we're actually kind of amazing.
Yeah.
We have, I think, the best goals and progress towards those goals in terms of decarbonization of our electricity sector. You know. Okay, so within the U.S. context, we're very advanced, and I think, if I remember correctly, we actually have a net negative goal, which is not just net neutral, like, you know, everyone's saying we want to not emit, but we're actually saying we're going to remove more than we use or emit. I don't know. I don't do a lot of policy on climate.
Because Hawaii is really unique. We have a lot of sun, a lot of wind. It's windier than most places, and geothermal.
Yeah.
And we also have something that some people are against. We have, but it's what do they call it? H-power. Isn't it what H-power is? Between 85 and 100% of your trash gets burned and turned into electricity. That accounts for about 2% of the electricity in the grid.
It's only 2%.
I think when you add up solar and H-power and wind, it's something where between 6 and 10%. So H-power alone is about 2, I would say. And there's scrubbers on the smokestack, so because it's right next to Ko'olina, so they don't want to like blast pollution right on like the second biggest tourist area. So they scrub all the pollution pollution out. But I think it's a reasonably good system. Ikaika's wife is an environmentalist. She's kind of against it because there is an incentive to produce more trash when you have that. And Hawaii produces more trash than other places, or some, because so much stuff is imported and packaged. Probably.
Yeah.
But it is a multi-pronged energy grid, because the main part of it is just burning oil. So it's about 5 different sources of electricity, but oil is still number one.
Yeah. I mean, so you guys are in this class because you're interested in sustainability, and I would say sounds like there's some science interest on this side of the room, but there's a lot of work to be done in sustainability in, like, not just in the hard sciences, but in finance and in in law. I mean, like, the reason why we don't have the bad news is we don't really recycle anything in Hawaii. The H-Power contract requires a minimum amount of trash to go to that facility to be burned to make electricity. And so in order to hit that minimum quota, the city diverts recyclable materials to H-Power, and it gets burned along with the plastic and everything else. So it's we actually don't reduce, reuse, and recycle because of this particular, I would say, bad contract that the city signed with H-Power. And that's a political thing, that's a legal thing, there's financial elements to it. So, I mean, there is so much work to be done across a multiplicity of disciplines for us to get to the planet that we all would really prefer to live on, which is not Mars, it's actually Earth. Yeah, Mars is really expensive. We don't want to go there.
I heard there's a nice planet 87 light years away. Very habitable.
So what are we gonna do? What's the plan? What are you guys doing to, save the planet, save ourselves?
We've done this as an icebreaker, so you already have your answers.
Okay, what are the answers real quick?
About sustainability.
Like, when I go to places, usually it's more for me, I usually just take bus or walk there. I don't really drive.
That's good. How many of you vote? 1, 2, 3. Not impressive. The Germans are excluded from this, and well, you guys better vote in Germany, but
Yeah, but we were too young.
too young. Okay. How old do you have to be to vote in Germany?
18.
And you're not 18?
Now we are 18.
Now you're 18.
But the last one was like 1.5 years ago.
Yeah, I think so. I'm a big believer in co-ops. I like unions. I think unions are really important because unions are like the power that the working class has against the evil capitalists who are, doing bad things. But voting is also like a really easy piece. How come you don't vote?
I don't know, I was here, so I wasn't
We have the mail. I'm serious. I mean, it's particularly young people. It's your planet. I mean, I've got 20 years on you. I'm going to be gone 20 years before you, but you have like another 2 decades to live after I'm gone. It's your planet. The hell aren't you voting? And the thing is, so many of these things are just purely political problems.
Okay, so at the very start, you said something about how, like, I understand it's bigger than this, but you said something that on like a personal scale, what you're doing isn't all that helpful in a way, in a sense. I want to hear your argument for why it's so important for this one person to vote compared to like that one person.
Because there's a lot of situations where, I'll give you an example here in Hawaii. The leadership of the state legislature, which controls, I don't know, a $25 billion budget, okay? The leadership of that legislature came down to less than 100 votes. That's why. You guys and a couple other classes could be the tipping point in a close election. And if you were to go and not just vote, but decide to support a candidate and go door to door, go door knocking for that person, you know, in a day, you can convince, I don't know, 5 or 6 people to vote for somebody that you're passionate about. So just with this group here, you could probably get those 100 votes in a day. Yeah. So that's why I think it's important.
Couldn't that be true of recycling? If I'm so passionate and, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle, I'm so passionate, I go and tell those peers, they tell their peers, and like, to me, it's the minimal scale is the same argument for recycling as it is for voting. I agree on both ends.
Yeah. The difference between politics and the difference is it comes down to like what's the word? Is it torque? It's the amount of extra or leverage. You know, if you think about it as a physics thing, if you can control just the budget of a very small state like Hawaii, right? That's billions of dollars of influence that you have, right? Whereas if you were to take that same effort and organize a recycling drive, you would feel good and you would be able to see the impact of your work. And so that's a great reason to it, because you feel like you're making a difference, and we should all feel like we're making a difference. I don't mean to make you think that you're nothing. I'm actually saying that you're everything, because your vote and your organizing, that's the thing that can be incredibly impactful. Yeah.
Just another example of a close election bigger than this is the presidential election of 2000. That election came down to something like 530 votes. 530 votes, not 530,000. Because it all came down to one county in the state of Florida, and it was so close. Or was it 1,500? It was some microscopic.
It was a tiny
number. And actually Al Gore won, but there was some voter fraud because the governor of Florida was George Bush's brother, Jeb Bush. And it's already been proven they were rigging the machines just enough to have Gore look like Gore lost. Now, Gore's the one who made the movie about climate change, right? So imagine he's president of the United States.
20 years ago.
Yeah. That's a huge impact for, it was 500 or 1,500 votes, some really small number. That's a very unusual situation, but it can be that close. A lot of close elections nowadays. Everyone's so divided, so everything's pretty close.
And the other thing too is, and I'll call it in a second, is that democracy in the United States is absolutely dying. Like it is wilting. There are forces in this country, and I say this as someone who prefers Hawaiian independence over being American, but there are forces in the United States that are actively pouring like poison on the idea of democracy. You know, they are actively disenfranchising voters. A lot of them are voters of color. You know, in like Texas, for instance, cutting them out of districts, essentially taking the rights away from people to be able to vote. So democracy is like not a sure thing. It is not a sure thing. It's a tool. It's a very, very powerful tool, and it's a tool they're trying to take away from you. Okay. Sorry.
This isn't like a question or like a reason to not vote. It's just like an analysis, I guess. I think something that's not as cool, for lack of a better word, is how in America, how it's very
Sure.
in general.
Yeah.
Like, sure, they won't win,
Yeah.
but it's still enticing, and they can put pressure on like the leading parties and majority and stuff like that. So I feel like in America, for example, like the presidential election, when Bannon was doing the debate against Trump, he was saying like, oh, I never said no fracking, we'll still be doing fracking and things like that. So it's kind of hard with the levels of government, because sure you can vote in municipal elections, but how much power does the city have on like sustainability policies, or like, for example, maybe like bylaws and zoning, so we can talk about
Yeah.
in like those terms. But I think a lot of people, young people, don't know about the different levels of government.
That's a really good point.
It's all just like the president, and then don't look at the other stuff.
I mean, zoning is a huge way to change and like to make our planet better. Like, if we just made it possible to build a house that went up to the curb, we could, and to build, you know, in Germany, I don't know where in Germany you live, but I've seen pictures. I see a lot of 4-story buildings and 8-story buildings. You know, not skyscrapers, but like what are called mid-rise apartment buildings. Those buildings are illegal in huge parts of the United States because it's too big, it's too tall. And the choice for a developer is either you build a single family house, which holds, I don't know, 4 or 5 people and a dog, or you build a huge skyscraper, right, which is really, really expensive. And so you can only build that building if you have $300 million. And so a lot of the really affordable, habitable housing, which we would like to build, the mid-rise buildings, are actually illegal, and it's just because of zoning. And we could house more people, you know, humanely. We could solve a lot of the climate problem because we could build. The other thing which is illegal in a lot of zones is building housing above a store. You can't do that in a lot of parts of the United States because of single-family zoning. You can't build a house that's near to, you know, a hospital or grocery stores or a school. You have to, you know, they tend to segregate out these land uses, and so you have to have a car, which is why so much of Honolulu sucks. I'm glad that you can get around with you know, on the bike or on the bus, but for a lot of folks here, you have to own a car in order to just like buy milk or buy a beer or whatever. You know, and that's all zoning. That has nothing to do with who's president of the United States. That's about who your city council member is, you know, who your mayor is.
So about local elections, the smaller you get when you go to vote, I found it's harder to select who you're going to vote for because
you don't know them.
You don't know them, right? You
Right.
see signs maybe with their names on it. Maybe you see like a political ad on TV, but it doesn't tell you anything. And as far as what's on Google to find more about them, very limited. Social media, very limited. Like, it is so hard to vote. So like, I find myself, I told myself when I first started voting, like, I'm not gonna be just like sticking to party lines, right?
Why?
But why?
You want to vote for Republican? Really?
Well, no, it wasn't that, but there's third parties and such, right?
Okay.
You know what I mean? But the thing is like, I can't find enough, you know, about these
Yeah,
local politicians often, enough so that I end up, you know, like a lot of the new ones, especially, they don't have a track record or anything, right? You end up just voting with party lines. And I think local politics, I don't know what it comes down to vote for them.
Yeah.
Well, you're from the place where the guy started shooting Democrats after he lost the.
Oh,
Did you hear about that?
yeah, I know. Turkey, yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, he lost and he actually went in. But
Yikes.
it's difficult. Well, no, I started voting here though because I've lived here for 7 years now, and it's still very difficult.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with voting, like your question about why does one person's vote matter, is I like groups. I like teams. I like political organizations. I like cooperatives. I like unions. I like it when we can find ways to work together to achieve a common goal. And democracy is just the biggest version of that. But the way to get to actual democracy, you know, is we have to start with, you know, I don't know, form a club. I would look at groups like the Sunrise Movement. Have you guys heard of the Sunrise Movement? you are the target demographic for the Sunrise Movement. It's a group of young people who are organizing politically, and they have chapters from small towns all the way to national. It's an amazing organization, and actually the founder of the Sunrise Movement, well, one of the founders, is from Hawaii. He's a local guy, Evan Weber. And yes, just please look up Sunrise. They're really amazing. If you're, I don't know how many of you guys work or are active in a union or belong to a union, I would recommend getting involved. Some unions are incredibly powerful and also really forward-thinking. I used to be an organizer with the Hotel Workers Union, which was the most amazing experience of my whole life, because that's a union that works with, that is the working people of Hawaii, the folks working in the hospitality industry, literally on the front lines of everything. And primarily, it's a union that's led mostly by women of color. It's short Filipino aunties who are just amazingly strong, amazing people. So that's my union of choice, is the Local 5, the Hotel Workers Union. I still think of myself as a member, even though I'm not a member. But I would recommend getting involved, in unions. If you belong to a church, there's a group called Faith Action for Community Equity, which I used to be deeply involved with. It works with people of faith who want to do political work, like forward-thinking political work.
Sorry, can I just say something on like the voting thing again?
Yeah.
Most of my experience like is in Canada, but I think a lot of the research and stuff is applicable in the US. But like we already talked about, it's not a surprise that like youth don't vote a lot. And when we talk about struggling to find information, the majority of the voters in local elections are older people, and they know that, and they follow the city councils throughout their terms. But with younger people, it's not so much that. So what counselors know a lot of times during the elections and the election technique is to then ramp up their social media presence if they like have a debate or something like that. But then a lot of the younger people that want to know more about them, you want to know more about the candidates when it's election time, but not like if they've already been, if they're an incumbent, you don't know what they've done in their term because you're not going to the council meetings, you're not going to the public hearings, so then you kind of rely on that last minute thing, which is why a lot of young people that then run in local elections, they know how to use TikTok, they know how to, so like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, everyone knows like what she's doing and what she's standing for,
Right.
and she knows how to like not weaponize, but like use
Use
the
it.
younger
Yeah.
platforms.
I think that's right. It's important to use the technology both for the candidate, but also from us as voters. But I'm going to backtrack a little bit because I don't want us to think that our job is to be like consumers of the politicians. Like, it's not a marketplace. It's it's a marketplace, but it should be a demand-driven marketplace. For the economists in the room, there's 3 or 4 candidates on the ballot, and we go itty, meeny, miny, mo. We pick one. The most important, the power comes when we all get together, and you go to the politician of your choice, and you say, "This is what we want you to do. If you want our votes, not my vote. My vote, you're right, is one vote. But if you want, I don't know, I got 20 friends here. If you want our 20 votes, here's what we want you to do." That's where the power is. That's where the power is. And that's why, like, the way that our union would approach candidates is it was basically saying, you know what, we've got 8,000 members. And not only do we have 8,000 members, most of whom are registered to vote in your district, but we're the only union that will go out and sign wave and door knock, show up at rallies, and also give money. So these are all ways in which we can say we have power, real power. So I don't think of politics as something that you should do individually. It's something that we should do collectively. And that way, you just bring that's where the power is. The politicians will go to where the power is. They will listen to the people who have the power. So, anyways, to me, that's an argument for joining an organization like Sunrise, joining your union, getting involved in, if you belong to a progressive church, getting involved with, you know, the group in that church that does this kind of stuff. I don't know, talking to your leaders. One of the projects that I'm working on is to build a kind of a neighborhood level organization where we get together at the community level and do politics, but we should do it together, not just as individuals. And then we could all be like Canada when we grow up. It could be awesome. Or Germany.
So just as a conversation starter, and I didn't mention this earlier, but Ikaika used to be a media person. He had a news site called the Hawaii Independent, and then he started a magazine called Summit. And both of those they got to the point where they were, starting a business, you have to basically make the 5-year mark to be viable. And both of them were right at that point and gave it all up to work on climate change. So, because those things were doing very well, but
I decided that, like, the magazine was the more recent of those two things. And what I realized one day is that it was also during the pandemic, which is another piece of my thinking on it. But I realized at the end of the day, I was taking pretty pictures and some pretty words and putting them on paper. And it wasn't the paper part that bothered me. It was just like, it was all about being pretty. And I was like, that's not that interesting. I want to actually, that's not doing anything, at least it's not what I wanted to be doing. I felt like there were more urgent things for me to do with my time than to make adjusting the widths of the columns and spell checking.
working with models.
Working with models. Sounds fun. It's not that much fun.
Why did you decide to use the magazine?
Yeah, I mean, so I decided to. What I tell people is that I put it in the fridge. So it's like, it still exists. We still have. It's easy to turn it back on. We have all those relationships still. And what I'm thinking about doing with the magazine is using it as a vehicle to not just inform, because I think the informing part is accomplished better through like social media and those sorts of communications tools. But there's a plan to get the magazine going again, but using it as a way of specifically connecting the people who are working on these issues around the world, because that to me is really the magical part is when you take the people in Hawaii who are working on restoring wetlands and saving species and building solar farms and co-ops and stuff, and you connect them with the similar but different projects that are happening in West Africa or in Canada, and you start to understand that we think of ourselves as being in our own little communities, in our own silos with our own little zoning codes and local problems, but really we're all trying to figure out this problem, and it's a very difficult thing, I think, for us as humans to understand things that are far away and that outside of our immediate realm of understanding. I mean, it's hard enough. We all speak English in this room. It's hard enough for us as people who speak English to understand what we're each thinking